Americans have become morbidly obese. Since the early 1960s, the prevalence of obesity among Americans has more than tripled. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of data, reliable data, that can be found from before the 1960s. I say unfortunately because something very peculiar happened to the American population starting in mid-1960s. 50 years ago, the sugar industry quietly paid scientists to point a finger at fat. The big sugar, everyone always talks about big pharma or big oil, but no one ever seems to recognize that big sugar is also a massive lobbying effort in the United States. Companies such as Coca-Cola paid Harvard scientists to publish misleading information on fat and sugar in order to conduct one of the largest psyopses on the American population to date. I mean, in my opinion, at least, this is one of the largest. This is one of the most consequential. May not be the largest, but it's the most consequential in my eyes. In the 1960s, the sugar industry funded research that downplayed the risks of sugar and highlighted the hazards of fat. This has all just been recently surfacing thanks to JAMA International Medicine. They conducted a very large analysis to uncover some pretty frightful things, especially when you look at how rapidly the rate of obesity has been increasing in the United States. It's really worldwide, but specific to the United States with this article. The sugar-funded project in question was a literature review examining a variety of studies and experiments. It suggested that there were major problems with all of these studies that implicated sugar, and concluded that cutting fat out of American diets was the best way to address coronary heart disease. Now, if you guys are familiar with diet at all, nutrition at all, you know that that is not accurate information in the slightest. In fact, having healthy fats in your diet is super advantageous. But when it comes to money on the line, people will do anything. It was a very smart thing that the sugar industry did because review papers, especially if you get them published in a very prominent journal, tend to shape the overall scientific discussion. Effectively, what these big sugar individuals from Coca-Cola, people like this group of individuals who were on the board of the Sugar Research Foundation, the SRF, specifically this guy in the top left who was the vice president, they put together a board of researchers, of scientists, of Harvard scientists to examine any publications that were going on in the space at the time that included anything to do with sucralose. Sucralose being sugar. And they would intentionally play down the severity of sugar on the American diet and play up the severity of any kind of fat. So they completely cornered the market for published peer-reviewed research. And if you know anything about research, you understand how severe that is. This board would end up paying approximately $50,000 in today's dollars for any research conducted. So every time they were able to refute one of these articles, they would pay $50,000 in today's value. It was $5,000 back then, I believe, but thanks inflation. Right here. In the 60s, the SRF, or the Sugar Research Foundation, became aware of a flowing number of reports that sugar is less desirable dietary source of calories than other carbohydrates, as John Hickson, the vice president, remember, John Hickson, this guy on the top left is John Hickson. He recommended that the industry fund its own studies, then we can publish the data and refute any detractors. The next year, several scientific articles were published suggesting a link between sucrose and coronary heart disease. The SRF approved the literature review project and then would pay scientists to poke holes in any research that was conducted. A different standard for different studies. Now, this was back in the 60s. This was decades ago. So we would assume that activities like this are not going to be happening in modern days, correct? Back then, you did not have to disclose who was paying you to conduct your research, and so you could just accept money from anyone you wanted to, and then you can poke holes in any kind of research articles. If something pops up, you can be like, oh, that's not statistically significant for us to pay attention to, or they only paid attention to this one type of sugar. We need to look at all sugar as a whole, all sweeteners. And you could poke holes in tons of different articles that just make the scientific community and people who don't understand reviewing scientific literature just question what exactly is going on. What can they trust? What can't they trust? It's a psyop. They want to just get in the way of any kind of legislature. You know, politicians don't have enough time to read through all of the literature. They're relying on these scientists to give them complete summaries. And if these scientists are paid off, it just is a huge area of conflict, a massive conflict of interest. So in a letter that Hickson, the vice president of the SRF, said to the organization, particular interest was in evaluating studies focused on carbohydrates in the form of sucrose. The scientists responded, "We are well aware, and we will cover this as well as we can." The project ended up running a little bit longer into the 1967. And the response was by the scientists, "Let me assure you, this is quite what we had in mind. We look forward to its appearance in print." This is from Hickson. They were very successful. They were very successful in lobbying and making people afraid of consuming fat. They're back at it again. This was 2015. This article is from 2015, so it's several years old at this point, but it's showing that even though the industry shifted away from behind the scenes funding to get specific narratives, they're still trying to create marketing campaigns in which they deceive and lie to the American public or to the public as a whole in order to get consumers consuming their products. So Coca-Cola funded many scientists who shift blame for obesity away from bad diets. They're trying to get people to move. They want people to exercise. I can get behind that. I love exercise. I think everyone needs to be doing it. Everyone understands that. We also all understand that you can't outrun a bad diet. So if you're consuming a 12-pack, a 6-pack of Coca-Cola every single day, there's no amount of running, no amount of exercise is going to make up for that. You're going to end up having some long-term consequences. Now, this is a crypto-focused channel. It's an investment-focused channel. Right now, above my head, you see PS Crypto. So what on earth does this have anything to do with crypto? Why are we talking about this? Aside from having to invest in our health and investing in our wealth, right? If we are saving up all of this wealth, if we're saving up all these XP points in the form of dollars for this random game that we play, we have to make sure that we're around long enough in order to actually utilize all of these XP points we're saving. That aside, there's a major problem when it comes to science, currently speaking, and it has to do with publishing. Did you know that up to 70% of research articles that are publicized cannot be replicated in lab settings? That's a huge flaw. That's a massive problem. How on earth is it that high that we can't replicate it when they outline step by step how to replicate these things? Decentralized science is coming in full steam. This is directly from Ethereum.org. Vitalik himself is extraordinarily bullish on the sector that is decentralized science because of things like what we outlined just moments ago. How people are able to pay to influence the current narrative when it comes to science and peer-reviewed literature. Everything that gets publicized in journals has to be funded. And whoever is funding the research is going to have a say or an input or some kind of behind the scenes pull on the direction in which that research is headed. That is, unless we get decentralized publishing. So science publishing is famously problematic because it is managed by publishing houses that rely upon free labor from scientists, reviewers, and editors to generate papers, but then charge exorbitant publishing fees. The public, who have usually indirectly paid for the work and the publication costs through taxation, can often not access the same work without paying the publisher again. You know, most scientists get grants from governments and from third parties. Those government grants come from taxation. The total fees for publishing individual science papers are often 5 figures, tens of thousands of dollars, undermining the whole concept of scientific knowledge as a public good, while generating enormous profits for a small group of publishers. This is just one section of decentralized science that I'm very bullish on. I think it has one of the most clear ways in which DeSci will help. That and funding, but that's a video for a different day. Publishing is something I'm super excited for, and not all of these decentralized science platforms have tokens associated with it, which is unfortunate when it comes to trying to buy and make money off of them, but it is very fortunate for the longevity of something like this. Not everything needs a token, and so it's better that they don't have a token because it shows that they're trying to actually stay here and not just be some form of a cash grab. I want to end it on something that, if you've made it this far, please like the video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the channel. We're going to do more videos like this where I just break down different concepts like this. Gotta get into a good swing of things, but I want to bring up something that may honestly end up getting this video taken down, but I think it's still worth bringing up, and that is YouTube's new policy that they enacted. I have too many tabs open here for me to actually pull it up, but YouTube, yeah, there it is. YouTube or Google has enacted a new policy for medical misinformation. On the surface, that sounds pretty nice. My computer's lagging hard here. On the surface, that sounds pretty decent, right? Nobody should be complaining about trying to censor out or stop medical misinformation. But in events like what happened 50 years ago, 60 years ago, what was happening more recently with lobbying, trying to change a public narrative, things like this cause a huge red flag. I'm not going to bring up a topic that recently happened in which this stems from, because those words can't be spoken online without getting censored, which is insane. It's just an absolute insane idea right there. But YouTube doesn't allow content that poses a serious risk of egregious harm by spreading medical misinformation that contradicts local health authorities or the World Health Organization. So if you give any kind of lecture or course or video, if you create a video that talks on public health or health as a whole that goes against the generally recognized guidelines set forth by the WHO and all world governing bodies, they will take the videos down. What happens when stuff like this goes on again? History repeats itself. Maybe it's not exact, but it often rhymes, right? You know that saying. Any video that pointed out that sugar was potentially causing coronary heart disease, which now we know to be extremely true. Sugar industry and coronary heart disease. It's like explicitly, the more sugar you take, the higher chances of having some sort of coronary heart disease. It's like mind blowing that they ever were able to cover this up. What happens back then? Any video that speaks out against that gets taken down. This guideline is egregious. This is very disgusting. Not a fan of it in the slightest. Your time's your most valuable asset. Hopefully this was worth investing into. I will see you guys tomorrow for the 9 a.m. live stream where we trade some cryptocurrencies.